Hello and welcome to this OCR Cambridge Technicals Level 3 Information Technology video. In this video we're going to have a look at Unit 8 Project Management, and we're looking at the second criteria, Pass 2. This assessment criteria strand says describe different project methodologies. So in this video I'm going to talk through what that means, look at a writing frame and how you can reduce the evidence, and then we'll end by looking at some examples of some students' work. Before we do that, it's quite useful to have a look at how the pass, merit and distinction criteria are assessed and how they fit into the overall picture of the final grade that you'll receive for this Unit 8. So, down the left-hand side here we have the LOs, which are the learning objectives. So the learning objective 1 is for you to understand the project life cycle. And within that, these are the assessment strands. The assessment strands begin with the pass criteria, which in my experience are often easier, but they tend to be more robust and they tend to be more descriptive. And you can see here, not always, but we've got describe, explain, complete something, evaluate. So they tend to be more written and they tend to be quite long. When we move into the distinction level, they tend to be more making use of the skill of evaluation, analysis. And then M criteria, merit criteria, tend to be comparisons, advantages, for and against, disadvantages, etc. Not always, but as a kind of rough guide, pass criteria are fairly easy, but they tend to have a lot of written content. Merit tends to be comparison. And then distinction level is usually evaluation. So it's the kind of nuance of how you write the response. In the previous video, we looked at explaining the different phases within the identified project lifecycle. And if I scroll back up, if you've got a copy of the the unit guide, you'll actually see that underneath the initiation phase, it actually sets out a lot of detail about what happens. And you can use this to support your P1. Covers the execution phase, also the evaluation phase. You don't have to cover all of these bullet points. If you haven't seen the video P1, which goes through how to produce the work and show some example work for pass criteria 1, you may want to check it out because it gives some good examples of the amount of work you have to produce in order to reach the standard for P1. Back to P2, which is what this video is about. Describe the different project methodologies. So let's scroll back to the top, find the information about the project methodologies. The project methodologies are listed in 1.1 at the top. Now, you don't have to cover every single one of these project methodologies. You don't also have to cover the ones that are listed in the syllabus. But it's probably a good idea to cover at least some of these, since this is what the examiners and the assessors will be trained to look for. As you already know, I'm not going to talk through the theory of these. If you want a video on that, or if that's of importance to you, then let me know in the comments, and that's a separate video I can produce. What I will do is talk through how you can set out this information. So what we're looking for Pass 2 criteria is for evidence that you can describe what each of these methodologies are. So let's have a look at how you can lay that out. So if we have a look at a writing frame example for P2, you can see at the top we have the assessment strand as the title, and then I've copied in the assessment criteria. Sorry, I've copied in the relevant part from the syllabus. So 1.2 project methodologies. You can remove this if you want to afterwards. It's quite useful then when you are writing. And then what I would advise you to do is for probably 4 of these different methodologies is to complete the following 4 steps. So create or write a definition, input a diagram, write an explanation, and then talk about advantages and disadvantages. So for example, if we take the waterfall method, we begin with what a definition of the waterfall method is. Now again, you can remember perhaps if you've seen video 1 for pass 1, you can use references, and I'll remind you how to do this in a minute. Second part is to get a diagram. So go on to an image search engine, type in waterfall method, input a diagram of the waterfall method. It's useful for doing this because it's easier sometimes to see the structure and the process rather than having to explain it or write it out in words. Then write an explanation of what the waterfall method is. And then finally, a couple of sentences or paragraphs about the advantages of the waterfall method and the disadvantages. It doesn't require that in the description, but it's quite a good way of being able to explain. Sorry, it's quite a good way of being able to demonstrate that you understand what the waterfall method is and the features of it. And then when you do, let's say, critical path analysis and you produce different advantages and different disadvantages, it's a good way to show the assessor that you know the differences between the different methodologies. So I would recommend you do 4. So we'll have 1 for waterfall, 1 for critical path, 1 for agile. So if we have a look at this first example of the work, this is a pass criteria, and you can probably just get a general feel that the student would have passed because of the work. But don't be fooled into thinking that it's the amount of content that you write that enables to meet the pass. It is the actual meeting the assessment criteria of explaining. And we're looking at another example in a minute. I'll show you in a bit more detail what I mean. So in this this student's response, they've actually broken the initiation phase into 3 separate categories: an overview, which is kind of like the description, the activities that take place, and this could be akin to the explanation. And they've also talked about the common issues that come up during the initiation phase. It's a very good piece of work. We then move into the planning phase, they then move to the execution phase, and then they've covered the evaluation phase. And the key to the success in this particular piece of work is that they have given a description of what happens in the initiation phase, and then they've talked about what actually goes on here, and this bit here is really the explanation. They've talked about the people that are dealing with it, the different documents, and what would happen. Let's have a look at another example. So you can see in this example, this is a simple 1-page response. Initiation phase, planning phase, execution phase, evaluation phase, all covered. As I mentioned earlier, it's not the amount or the quantity that you write, it's ensuring that you hit this criteria. So what we're looking for is, has this student explained the different phases? So what we're looking for in here is an explanation or examples of what happens in the initiation phase. This is a pass, but I wouldn't say it's a strong pass. Somewhere between the piece of work you saw before and this one is a good benchmark to aim for. You'll notice that in these different explanations, they've said what's happening, said what's going on, there's workflows, they're creating tasks, team members need to be briefed. They've also talked about a budget here, so they're describing or explaining explaining what's happening in each of these phases. This piece of work could be improved by including a reference to the type of documents that are used, although they do briefly mention it. So in the planning phase, the project plans will be documented, but perhaps we'd like a little bit more detail about what happens with the project plan, rather than just a reference to it. Here we've got a closure report will need to be completed. Again, they haven't really explained what a closure report is, and that would be useful. But as I said, as a whole piece, this is a pass and meets the criteria. So that wraps up the overview of the Project Management Unit 8 pass criteria. If you've got any comments, questions, any queries, please leave them below and I will do my best to answer them. You probably guessed the next video is going to be pass criteria 2. Thanks for watching. Hope it was helpful. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share.